Friends, today, the 20th of October, marks the 69th year since J.R.R. Tolkien published the book The Return of the King, which was the third and final book in his trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. The series of books grew out of Tolkien's traumatic experiences of participating in World War I and became a cathartic way for him to work through the trauma he had experienced. And in doing so, Tolkien also revealed the power of mythology to express deep archetypal truths about the nature of human existence. Most specifically, the book is a commentary on the ability of power to corrupt and to bring out the worst in us, the darkness within us. Corrupted by power, human beings have inflicted the most terrible atrocities on one another. And this is symbolized in the book by the magical ring of power. And that those who wear it for too long get drawn into darkness and evil. And this brings us to our gospel passage today from Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45. In last week's gospel passage, we encountered a man who was blinded by his attachment to his material wealth. And so he was unable to experience the deeper life of the Spirit. In today's gospel passage, we now encounter two of Jesus' closest disciples who are blinded by their desire for role and status and power, the desires of the ego, that likewise for them have become an obstacle to understanding and entering the life of the Spirit and the way of Jesus. The story of the rich young man from last week, who's blinded by his attachments to wealth, ends with Jesus saying to his disciples, "The first will be last, and the last will be first." He then tells them of his impending suffering and death in Jerusalem, but James and John show a complete failure in understanding. They imagine that Jesus is going to Jerusalem to overthrow the occupying forces of the Roman Empire and to re-establish the Jewish state or kingdom of Israel as a political entity, to bring back the glory days of David. They think that Jesus has come with a Jewish nationalist agenda and that his aim and purpose is to make Israel great again, to put them back on the map and to destroy and drive out their enemies. And so James and John come to Jesus secretly because they do not want the other disciples to overhear what they are about to ask as they put this special request to Jesus. Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory. Now we must be clear that when they refer to the glory of Jesus, they are not referring to some heavenly glory in the afterlife, in the world to come. What they have in mind is something much more worldly and political. They are specifically thinking of Jesus in worldly political glory, with all the political pomp and ceremony and power that goes with that. They are imagining to themselves that they will be Jesus' right and left-hand men when Jesus re-establishes the throne of David and reconstitutes the political entity of the kingdom of Israel. And Jesus replies with these words, "You have absolutely no idea what you are asking." In other words, they have completely misunderstood the values, aims, and intentions of Jesus. This becomes clear and explicit by the end of the passage. By this time, the other disciples have got wind of what James and John have asked of Jesus. And in verse 41, we read that they have become indignant with James and John. The Greek word is aganakteho, which means to be angry, to be aggrieved, to be indignant, to be incensed. It's perhaps how you might feel when you've been waiting for a parking and someone slips in first and steals a parking that you've been eyeing out. Why are the other disciples aggrieved, indignant, angry, and incensed? Because they themselves have been eyeing out these positions. They too have completely misunderstood who Jesus is and what his values, aims, and intentions are. They've misunderstood the way of Jesus. The disciples reveal to us the danger that every Christian faces when our Christian faith becomes wedded, firstly, to a nationalistic agenda, and secondly, when we follow the ego's desire for power, role, status, and control. And so Jesus, with infinite patience, explains to them yet again the way of the reign of God, the kingdom of the heart, the reign of divine love. Firstly, he points to the way of the Gentile rulers, the rulers of the nations. In other words, he's pointing specifically to the way of the Roman Empire, but with them to all the empires of the world. These are the ways of domination, of ruling with force and with power, clearly establishing who is boss, lording it over others with an iron rod and with threats of violence. Not so with you, Jesus says to them. In other words, this is not the way of the reign of God. It is not the way that Jesus is modeling for them. Instead, he says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. And so the way of Jesus, the way of the reign of God, turns the way of power on its head. It is why the way of Jesus has often been referred to as the upside-down kingdom, because the ways of divine love work with gentleness from the bottom up, rather than dominating and controlling from the top down. As Jesus goes on to say, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And here the term Son of Man does not necessarily refer only to Jesus, but in fact refers to the universal divine consciousness that resides in every human being as our highest self. Jesus is therefore modeling what it looks like when people begin to live from their highest self, from their deepest spiritual identity, instead of grasping for power, which corrupts. Those who live from the place of their higher divine self and allow the divine to reign within their hearts quite naturally begin to walk the ways of humility and selfless love, taking on the role of a servant of others, giving of themselves, often at great cost, for the sake of others. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, says Jesus, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. True greatness lies not in asserting one's individual will or ego and dominating others, but in surrendering to the greater whole and to the reign of divine love. And so in our passage today, Jesus challenges all our previous authoritarian notions of God as the dominating, controlling force who watches threateningly over us. Jesus is clear. The way of God is not the way of domination over others. Rather, it is to be seen in the ways of gentleness and kindness and redeeming love, the way of selfless love and humble service. This way of Jesus, of humble and loving service towards all people, is not unique to Christianity, even though it is very profoundly embodied and expressed in Jesus. It's echoed also very profoundly in Mahayana Buddhism, in the ideal of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is one who stands on the edge of final spiritual attainment, and instead of entering the bliss of nirvana, makes a vow to delay their spiritual attainment for the sake of helping to liberate other beings who are lost in the great ocean of suffering. This is very profoundly expressed in the legendary or mythical figure of Kshitigarbha, who vows not to enter into the bliss of nirvana until all the hell realms have been emptied and all beings trapped there have been liberated from their sufferings, and they come to realize that they too are Buddhas in disguise. This way of Jesus, of selfless love and service, rather than following the way of status, control, and domination, is also beautifully expressed in that ancient book of Chinese wisdom called the Tao Te Ching. At the heart of Taoist philosophy, we find the same humility and letting go of control. The Tao Te Ching teaches that the sage leads by serving, and that the soft and yielding is superior to the hard, the dominating, and the controlling. We find it expressed beautifully in chapter 30. Whoever relies on the Tao in governing people doesn't try to force issues or defeat enemies by force of arms. For every force there is a counterforce. Violence, even well-intentioned, always rebounds upon itself. And again in chapter 8, the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus it is like the Tao. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to simply be yourself and don't compare or compete, everybody will respect you. And finally, that way of Jesus, or the reign of God, is also expressed profoundly in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, in a quote that speaks of using power for healing rather than for destruction. For it is said in old lore, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so shall the rightful king be known. Amen. God bless you as you continue to meditate and reflect more deeply on these things. Amen.